Hello everyone, I'm Robin Vogels from Personnel Relocations, and I'm super excited today to be joined by Dr. Gerda Schultz, who's going to talk to us not only about her own journey of relocating to Australia, but also giving you some tips on how you can deal with the stress and anxiety of moving. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Schultz. I really appreciate it.
Hello, Robin. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to be able to do this. Thank you so much.
Especially giving up your Sunday. I sincerely appreciate that, but I think it's easier for a lot of people to be able to take some time out and understand this, because this is really one of the things people don't prepare for. Everybody prepares for furniture removals and house hunting, but the stress and anxiety, I don't know if you get it, but I get a lot of people who don't even prepare for the jet lag.
Well, that's absolutely true. Yeah, we're in different time zones and it will definitely catch you in the beginning for sure.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that's a bit like culture shock. And I know we're going to talk about that later, but culture shock and jet lag, people just seem to think they're immune to it. I get so many people who send me this big list of what they're going to do the first week they arrive. And I'm just like, we're just going to open your bank account and chill.
It's actually very humbling. I remember once we traveled to America, and I thought, being a doctor and I worked at all sorts of hours, this is not going to catch up with me, boy, but it made me humble.
Yes. And culture shock does that to you as well. It just brings
very much so.
Nobody's immune from it.
Absolutely.
You said you were a doctor, and I know you've traveled extensively. So tell us a bit about yourself, your background, what brought you to Australia. Tell us your story.
Okay, thank you, Robin. Now, I am a medical doctor from South Africa. That's where I qualified, and I worked there for 24 years in a private practice. I also had a weight management clinic, and I was also involved in reality TV in wellness and health there. Okay. And my husband and I, we also had a 16-year-old daughter at that time. She's now older. He got an unexpected job invitation to come and work in Australia. And I remember the day when we were actually sitting in bed having a cup of tea, and he just looked up from his phone and he said to me, I have an invitation to go to Australia to go and work there. And to us, it was like a no-brainer, because per definition, we were actually too old to apply for a visa to come over. Okay. So yes, 8 weeks later, he was working in Perth, Australia, and I and our daughter had to pack up our life of 24 years, and our medical practice, sell the house. It's cars, it's the family dog, it's friends. It's actually quite dramatic. And then, yes,
closing my business and doing all that, that would be very dramatic.
It was very overwhelming, the logistics. And then, like I said, my husband, 8 weeks later, he was working in Perth, and then we followed him almost 3 months later. Okay. And then, yes, one day I actually woke up and I found myself in Australia. So getting that visa, I always say that to be granted that visa is almost like winning the lotto, but you're mourning your situation.
Yeah.
You're so excited to come, and you understand the privilege, because it absolutely is a privilege. But then it's daunting what you have to leave behind, the whole journey from the moment it says granted to putting foot on soil in Australia. Yes. So you're excited to leave, to escape maybe turmoil, to go to a better opportunity, but it's incredibly difficult to leave.
It is. I always say to people, I think the decision is one of the hardest things to do, is to make that decision whether to go. And then nothing feels real. Even when I've moved country a number of times, and, I left South Africa back in the 90s already, where you still were posting letters home. And that's when it would hit me, when I would put my return address on an envelope and it'd be England. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, I actually live in another country. There's just those moments where you realize that everything's changed. It is sort of a light bulb moment, if you like, of
indeed. It's a life event. And people say, so why is it actually so stressful? And I've actually went and I read up, and it says that on the stress scale, it's actually second to losing a loved one, equal to divorce. And I
Right.
gave that a lot of thought. And it is actually very similar to divorce. If you think about divorce, there's a separation coming up, a
Yes.
separation that you're not necessarily ready for,
Yes.
and that you have to prepare for. And there are houses involved, there are cars involved, there are furniture involved, there are groups of friends involved. There's the area that you live in. You don't necessarily want to give it up, but you know you kind of don't have a choice and you have to move on.
Yes.
So you're really leaving everything that you know and love behind.
Yes.
And the thing that I didn't realize was you are also leaving a massive network behind. You leave your social network behind, your professional network, your community network, your church network.
Absolutely.
And then you start over again.
Absolutely. And people don't prepare for that. I know I've been with a few people who have moved, and you see them unpacking and they've brought these big platters and big dishes and entertaining, and you're sort of thinking it's all changed, and they haven't really thought it through yet. But it is, as you say, it's like going through a divorce. You're separating from everything. Everything that you know and feel and understand is about to change, and that is extremely stressful. Extremely stressful.
Yeah, and migration actually, you go through phases. In
Yes.
terms of logistics, you have your pre-migration phase, then migration and post-migration. Now, pre-migration is the stuff that we've mentioned now. The
Yes.
logistics, packing up a life, selling everything, getting rid of things, make your travel lighter to be able to move to the next country. And I mean, that's applying for the visa, waiting for the police clearance, all that paperwork, doing an English test, etc. It keeps you busy.
It does. It does.
Can be overwhelming. It can be very stressful. So you don't actually think about how to prepare yourself mentally to be on the other side because you're so busy with all these things that you have to do.
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to encourage anybody who's watching this live at the moment, if you've got any questions, please put them in the comments. We're more than happy to answer your questions. So if anybody who's watching it, if you've got any questions, please pop them in the comments and we'll answer them. So coming back to the phases,
yes,
what I'm noticing is that people can have what can I say, sort of varying lengths of the phases. Some people can go through it quite quickly, but some people actually struggle for many, many years. Have you seen?
Yes, and I think there's so much going on, and there's so many different elements. I'm just thinking about the migration per se. I'm actually coaching clients at the moment where the migration really, the trip traumatized them so much because that happened all through COVID. You know, in a family of 4, you had to test negative. Then all of a sudden someone tests positive. Then the flight is being delayed or cancelled. And I mean, flights were cancelled. And then there was the housing, the Airbnbs, etc. Connection flights were missed. So that migration from your home country to Australia, that in itself was a big thing.
It was a huge thing. And, you know, I moved a lot of people still through that time. And it's a very... there's a whole nother layer of complexity on it. But, you know, you mentioned just now about having networks. And when you arrived in Australia and everybody's shut down, you literally couldn't make friends. You know, I was having to keep checking on people, making sure that they were okay, because you were locked in. You couldn't make friends. And building that network is so important. It's really very, very important.
We had a similar experience because we were fortunate enough to come in just before COVID. And then our daughter started school. She was in year 11. So she's just started school. It's a difficult time in a school career at difficult age, etc. So she's just started school. She was into school for a few weeks and then we had the lockdown. Then all of a sudden starting ready, emotionally ready to put yourself out there to make some friends. And then all of a sudden back to lockdown.
Yes.
And then to go back after 3 months and to start from scratch again was almost like, it was like being the new kid all over again in everything that she did. So yes, that is a big thing.
That would have been a big difference for her, you know, and hard for parents to navigate all that as well, isn't it? Because
how do you know?
During COVID, you just didn't know how long it was going to take for.
Yes, nobody had an idea, and I mean, it was such a curveball.
Yeah, yeah.
But then I find that families quite often when they arrive, they go through, this is part of the culture shock story, that phenomenon, that they arrive and then it's almost like a honeymoon phase. And that's now when we assume that the whole journey here didn't traumatize them, as what quite often happened. But during that phase, it's so exciting because it's really almost like an overseas holiday. Everything is new. You've got beaches to discover. There's lots of tourist sites that you can go to. Food is different.
Billboard is exciting. You know,
everything is new, you know, and your brain tells you that this is like a holiday because home is where you came from.
Yes, 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 absolutely.
But then all of a sudden reality hits you.
Yeah.
And that's what we call the rejection phase. This is where the reality of housing and employment and looking after your family and just the logistics of putting a life together can hit you. And that can be really overwhelming because as we've just said, you don't have your network anymore. You don't know where to go for a haircut or who's the doctor or any of those things. And it's amazing because we take it for granted.
It is like somebody's pulled the rug out from underneath you. Nobody knows your history. Nobody understands that, hey, I'm a good, honest person. They don't know. You've got to prove yourself at every possible opportunity once again.
And this was the thing that happened to me. One day I woke up, my husband went to work, my daughter went to school, and I had nowhere to go.
Yes, that's when it hits you. And there's just boxes to unpack.
Yeah, I knew nobody. And I think worst of all, nobody knew me. And that's also part of it. You know, I don't have anyone that I can just quickly phone and ask.
No.
And that's...
You can't sit there and say to somebody, oh, I ran a wellness clinic, I'm a GP, because you just sound like you're talking about yourself. And they're going to be like, well, it's all puppy syndrome. I'm not talking to you, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And during that stage, I started finding that there are a lot of other migrants going through the same. And it's quite often the partner or the spouse of the person who was actually granted the visa.
Yes.
The other half.
Yes. Yes.
And they do suffer from loss of identity, etc. So that's when I decided, no, we can do better. Yes. And I started studying, get myself qualified as a life coach. And I just realized that we've got to do something for these guys because there are so many of them here.
Absolutely. And they're not identifying it. I found a lot of people aren't identifying it in themselves. And I think you can't get help if you don't recognize it because people aren't talking about this, which kind of brings me on to another question I had for you was, how can families prepare?
I think that's a very important thing. If I can just quickly give some hope in the culture shock curve, is once you hit that rock bottom, you know, that's then the phase where you start adjusting and adapting. And then slowly you come out of it with integration and by knowing who you are, not by giving up who you are. And I think that's a very important thing. You need to know who you are. Absolutely. And then out on the other side, you know, once you find your place in society. But an interesting thing before we get to the preparation is perhaps just saying that when people come, say, for a 2-year contract, 5-year contract from the beginning, and they know that they go back, then quite often on the other side, going back to their home country, they have reverse culture shock.
Repatriation.
Yes.
And it's so true what you say also about it tends to be the accompanying spouse that perhaps has fears or feels the emotions and the roller coaster of that culture shock. And I find because very often, especially when I'm doing corporate relocations and we're relocating somebody within the organization, they've already got their network. They've already proven their worth around the boardroom table. So it's exactly like you said. And that's why I always think, you know, it is the accompanying spouse that needs that support because they've got to start from scratch and, you know, they've got to still get the kids in school and put a plate of food on the table and they don't even know what the ingredients are called because there's different.
True. Yeah, so, shopping is a challenge.
Yeah, it is.
Yes. So in terms of preparation, I feel very strong about if you have a why, you will be able to bear with your how. In other words, I motivate my clients to have a why list. In other words, why did you decide that you want to come to Australia? What are your push factors or what are your pull factors? And I really motivate clients to write it down. And I have these conversations daily where people would say, when I went through that hard phase, I actually just pulled out my book and I just read it, and I just realized that all of this is still true, and this is why we wanted to be here, and nothing has changed. That is still valid. So the why list for me is probably the number one thing in your preparation, because then you're going to figure out your how.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah,
that's so true. I think people need to be aware of that before they move. That will be very clear with yourself as to what your motivation is and what your dreams are for Australia. But I think also making sure that those dreams are a reality, and not the whole of Australia is Bondi Beach. So you've got to be prepared for
absolutely true,
the reality of Australia.
Yeah. And this is what I want to unpack a little bit. And I say, like all things in life, if you're busy with something that's difficult, first get your basics right. That's eating and drinking healthy, do your exercise, and sleep. And then
sleep.
Because you need clarity in your brain. But now starting to prepare offshore, especially in terms of the culture, there are 5 questions that I think it's important for a family to answer and discuss in terms of their own culture, but also regarding the new culture. So let me explain a little bit about that. The first question is, what is valuable? So you need to know for yourself what is valuable. And I mean by that, symbols, customs, even like public holidays, because there are a reason for it. So you understand your own, but in your new culture, this is important. The next question that's very important is, what is acceptable? That is in terms of, for instance, behavior. You need to know what is normal behavior. You know what's normal for you, but now in your new culture. What may be embarrassing? Or what may be even illegal? Because I know in some countries, for instance, a speed limit is considered to be a recommendation. If you exceed that speed limit in Australia, you're going to be in trouble because it's illegal.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I think it's important to understand those things. The next question is that the family's got to discuss is, what is important? In other words, how do people value dignity? Because that's what we're all after. And also, what is considered to be good manners in your new culture? Because you know what's important for you in that regard, but you don't know where you're going.
The local etiquette.
Yes. And then also, what is true? That brings you to right and wrong. What is right and wrong? And then the biggest question in terms of culture is, what is real? Now, this is the deep stuff. This is the meaning of life that you need to unpack for yourself. And this is quite often where the God conversation also will come in. But then the parents, they have to make sure that the parent-to-parent relationship is strong. What does this mean? It means that you've got to have commitment towards each other. A respectful relationship. The kids have to see this. And you have to nurture each other.
Absolutely. It has to really be team.
That's the safety net. So moving on to the kids. The kids need to be, you need to know this, be provided for, obviously. Protected. They must know they belong to you and your family and to your culture group. They need to be comforted if it's necessary. They need to feel valued in their family, and they need to be heard and need to give input into big decisions, especially where they are involved.
Absolutely. And I think, I've certainly seen it even in my own moves. You have to be very careful what you say around the children. Big conversations about, when you're looking to move, there's sometimes job negotiations going on, there's contract negotiations. If you're having all those conversations in front of the children and they're nervous kind of conversations, or you and your partner are just, battering backwards and forwards, how is the child perceiving what you're talking about? You've got to be very mindful of those things.
Yeah, and they're very sensitive. They pick it up.
Oh,
But
yeah.
then there's actually very nice advice in terms of now you build a RAFT. What does this mean? It means the R stands for reconciliation. So you now planning your move. What does reconciliation mean? It means that you've got to make sure that the conversations that's necessary, you have to have them. If there's disputes in relationships with family and friends, resolve them. For a small child, it may perhaps mean that toy that you broke and you left with a fight, perhaps just say, I'm sorry to Johnny.
Yeah.
That's reconciliation.
Yes.
And then affirmation. That is, people want to thank you and acknowledge you. And we sometimes feel a little bit uneasy when that happens, but you've got to allow that. If they want to do a send away, allow them. And also thank them for what they did in your life, because, we all live in villages. We all have people who made us who we are.
Yes. Yes.
The F is for farewell. I think it's important, not just for adults, but for kids too, to have little farewell parties for them where they can tell their friends about the new adventure and say goodbye and say, when you come and visit us, we will do this and that. Do a farewell, because there's always hope in that.
Yes. Yes.
And then the T of RAFT is think about destination.
Yes.
And this is where you prepare yourself and get information and knowledge about where you're going. And then, of course, I'm very pro the coaching. If you can start with migration mindset and resilience coaching when you're offshore, I realize it's a busy time, but it's very important to pick that up once you're onshore.
Yeah, absolutely. And how far in advance can people start that? What is any time a good time?
I think any time is a good time. Once you've made the decision and decide that this is what you want to do, I think, because the coaching, the migration mindset and resilience coaching is obviously focused on migration, but it's about growing and give you skills and tools to handle all sorts of difficult situations. So it's going to be of benefit for you in the future. It doesn't matter what you do. Obviously, with this being such a high a stress factor, the move itself, it's going to be handy, but you will always be able to apply that.
And do you think the family should do it as a group, or should it be one of the family that can kind of set the example?
There's definitely sessions that one should do as a group, because I let each individual do their own little evaluation, have their own pen and paper, make their own notes, etc. And then quite often compare. And then quite often afterwards, I say to them, I want you to discuss it with each other, because you need to understand who is on which page.
Yes.
Because we don't necessarily carry the same concerns or have the same things that we value in terms of emotions. Some people do want to feel safe, other wants to feel successful. Some people want to feel loved more than receive recognition. So that is important. Where it's more adults, we'll do that as adults alone, but quite often we can do it as a family. Obviously, it depends on how old the kids are.
I think it's so important, and I think, in your situation especially, you had 8 weeks before your husband left. But some people have 8 weeks before the whole family leaves. And I think it's really important that you have that time to assess your family values and what you're planning for Australia. So I think that mindset coaching it really brings to the forefront that teamwork that's needed for a family. I think people really, really underestimate that. And it's so important. If you don't have strong family values or even identify what those values are, and those values can change, especially as children are growing, those family values can change. And if they're not being reinforced, but on the other hand, also picking your battles. So as you were saying, if somebody's broken a toy, let's just let it go for now. But sort of saying, in our family, we wouldn't normally let this go. So just reminding them of those family values. So I think some of that coaching is part of that, is reminding the family that this is what's important to us as a family and what we're all looking for, so that you all have a common goal. I think it's really important.
I think it's a big message to say that you don't need to give up who you are. You have to keep your identity. And within that identity, you will be able to integrate, because this is one of the things that's so amazing here in Australia. I mean, the complete way that the Australian people deal with migrants and their attitude towards migrants are just so amazing. Yes. We actually had coffee this morning with our neighbors who happened to be French Canadians, and the other guests were from Namibia.
Okay.
And we were just talking about that golden thread that runs through everyone who's being a migrant. We understand each other. There's immediately a bond, though we come from different places all over the world. But then, yes, but then what a wonderful surprise it was, and it actually gave me a tear in the eye to be a new person, a foreigner, a stranger, a migrant, and people would say to me, "Welcome to Australia. Please tell me if there's anything I can help you with, or is there anything that you need?"
Yes, they're very willing to help. And I get the question a lot, especially with international students. I get, the question about, are Australian racists? Because there's a lot of that in the press, unfortunately. I've never experienced that. And I don't think any of my relocations, and I've done nearly 1,000 or over 1,000 relocations to Australia, I don't think anybody has ever come back to me and had some sort of racist comment or anything against them. So it is quite sad that we're getting this sort of label, if you like. We do have a question from Donnie. He's asking, do you need to bring up your kids as Australians? And yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm assuming, looking at the name, that Donnie's coming from South Africa, and I think the South African culture and the Australian culture are very similar. But I don't know, is that a question that you've had before? Do you need to bring up your kids as Australians? I think I could give a few things. I'll put it to you.
Yes, we can share opinions. I think first of all, it depends on how old the kid is. But always, when you have a difficult question, go back to basics. What are your family values? And I think that's the most important thing. You have to have that baseline of who I am within my family.
Yes.
And then in that, if it's an older child, they have already spent most of their life in their previous culture or the country of their nationality. And it's important for them to know that they don't need to give it up. They don't need to change, because this is who made them who they are. This is why we as a family got a visa, because we have skill as a South African family in our case. We don't need to give that up.
No.
However, having our identity, having our values, keeping to our family rules, we integrate and respect the community around us.
Yes, 100%.
So I have clients who brought their kids up who are Afrikaans speaking, but they bring their kids up English speaking, but they still have certain values that comes from traditional Afrikaans families. But I think in the end, it's a choice and a decision for a family to make.
Absolutely. And I think, there's so much I could unpack here with different nationalities and things, but I think the important thing is that you can't stay in just one migrant silo. You can't just stay in that one.
No.
You've got to adapt slightly to the culture and everything that you are coming into. And there it needs to be some flexibility. But as you said, you've got to have that core of you as a family. What is important to you and what are those values? And I think if you can start there, where you're willing to bend and flex, let's say.
Yes, and I think with like everything else in life, live your life with respect. Respect your new country, respect the culture, respect the opportunity.
Yes.
If something doesn't work or appeal to you, you don't need to be part of it. It's a choice. And this is also what's so wonderful about Australia. They motivate you not to give up your identity. Even at the schools, they have these multicultural days where kids can dress up if they've got traditional clothes that they wear and bring traditional dishes, etc. But remember, you are in Australia now, or if you go to America, you're now in America. So there's certain things that you really have to adapt to and respect the way it's done. And I think if you do that, you'll be okay.
And it's so true what you say, that they do appreciate and they're interested to hear about where you've come from and what your story is, and being international is celebrated. I know when my son went through his year 12 graduation, it was part of the tradition that you wore your primary school uniform to the last day of school. So you had all these big burly year 12 boys but my son had been to probably 4 different schools, 4 or 5 different primary schools. So he wore a tie from one, he wore a hat from another, and they celebrate that. They actually had, so in the schools, you had streams of schools. So primary schools would, go into that particular high school. But they had an international section, and there were Kiwis and Americans and all sorts of things there. So it definitely is celebrated. Everybody is included. And I think that's important. We've got another question. Are you okay for another question?
Yes.
So how do I handle family members who've been against and unsupportive of our big move? And that's a tricky one again. I've certainly seen that with a few of our relocations where family members haven't been supportive, and there's a few really sad stories out there. Have you come across that? Do you have any words?
Yes. Yes. And I assume the question comes from someone who is planning to relocate and still planning a migration. I think this is part of where we say the RAFT. This is the place where we have to have those deep conversations. This is the place where we explain our why list, why we are doing this. What are the push factors? What are the pull factors? What are the benefits of where we're going versus the leaving? What is the future looking like where we're staying? What are the opportunities? Because a lot of migrants do migration or relocation for their kids for a better future, but a lot are also doing it because it's a parent who got a job opportunity. That will broaden their horizons, their careers, etc. And this is why that why list is so important, because you as a family have to sit down and really unpack that and be honest about where is this going to take us. If you know that your why is good, then you can actually have that open discussion, but a peaceful discussion.
Yes.
Sit down with your family, have a meal and say, we know this is the elephant in the room, but let's get rid of it. Let's talk about this, because leaving family members behind who feels disgruntled, that just adds to the stress. And standing with feet in 2 continents is a very stressful situation. I see that in clients quite often, having a mom and dad who's ill in a different continent, family members, and sitting this side. So you don't want that emotional baggage. Hence, that's why we started with a RAFT. I think having those conversations, that's the only way.
It's very important. And there's some cultures and some beliefs that you're just not going to change, no matter how many you have. And I think, again, if you've got your own values and you know your why, you can find comfort, because there's just some mother-in-laws you're not going to impress.
That's also true. That's also true. But I think
that why, as you say, is important. You feel comfortable with your decision that this is the important thing for my family.
Yeah, and I think we all come from a place we just want the best for your family and your kids. And you will find that best amongst your whys.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Very true. Very true. We've got a question from Karen that I can probably answer.
Go for it, Sir Robin.
So we're packing up the whole house into just a few boxes. Panic mode every day. we think about what we've had to leave behind. I walk into the room, I don't even know where to start. How do I deal with that stress ball in my stomach? So Karen, my advice to you would be unpack every single box, even if it's to the floor, and just start sorting. Just get rid of the boxes, because once you can see what's inside the boxes, it's a little bit less overwhelming. But Gerda, do you have anything to help her deal with the stress ball in her stomach? I think it's lots of chamomile tea.
Yes, obviously, like I say, get all the basics right. Always starts with the basics, because if you don't have that foundation, then it's even harder to deal with this. I think in general, when you migrate, there's so much uncertainty happening in your brain, and a lot of people function with certainty.
Yes.
And
yes.
having boxes, being surrounded by boxes, adds to that uncertainty. So if your whole house, your rental probably in the beginning, is full of boxes, you probably did mark them. Move everything into your garage and just keep the boxes that you're going to need now and unpack them. Yes. So try and get your house uncluttered and neat. You don't need to walk into your garage one day when you've got your own place, or if your final move, etc. Then you're probably not going to unpack them all and throw most of them away, but just try and create a little bit of a peaceful, neat space, because stressed brains do not function well in chaos. So try and get a little bit of neatness, structure, and order.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And as you said earlier, eat properly and sleep properly. I think that's hugely important.
Exercise. And you can do that in a very safe environment here. That's one of the absolute pros.
You certainly can. Now, I want to ask you a little bit. I know we touched on it earlier on, about the business that you're running now. And I was very interested in your logo. You've got the dandelion with the pieces coming off it and the word unbecoming. Tell me a little bit about that.
That's coming from my South African background. You know, if you look at a dandelion, then you can decide, is this a weed or a wish? So that's the first thing when you migrate. Okay. It's all about mindset, you know. Yes. It is an opportunity. It is a privilege to be able to get that visa.
Yes.
And then I find that from where we come, in a country where there's a lot of turmoil and challenges, that I had to become so many things to be able to survive there. Not necessarily all things that's good for you or that you're proud of. And now that I'm in an environment where we are safer, a space of equal opportunity, where we've got more freedom, I could actually unbecome some of those layers, get rid of that, getting rid of that extreme competitiveness, because, you know, being the best in whatever didn't necessarily guarantee a place at uni for your kid. But now we're in an equal opportunity place, that if you do your bit, you will have an opportunity. So getting rid of that anxiety, etc., and just become who you're really supposed to be without all those layers. And then obviously, like I say, a wish or a weed, blow away what's not necessary.
I love it. I love that. And it's so important, mindset. You know, it's the tagline for my business is make the right start, because that comes from mindset. If you don't make the right start, and I've seen it so many times where people have moved reluctantly because maybe the spouse has got a job, and if you start off being reluctant, you're just going to notice all the negativity, and it's just going to snowball from there. Whereas on the opposite side, if you come here and you're excited and you're looking forward to the opportunity, positive things will keep happening. So yeah, mindset is and I think that's where coaching is so important.
Your brain is an amazing thing, and you get what you focus on. That is one of the things that I actually use during my coaching. And then also, if you look at your brain, it does two things. The first thing is it wants to keep you safe. Now, the moment you're not in your own environment and everything is new and foreign and strange, you just sense danger, but there's no lion, but everything. And that's why your brain is actually playing havoc. And this is why you're going through all this anxiety. And we try and just put order to that and make you understand yourself and let you get self-awareness of where you are and why you're feeling the way you feel. And then the last thing that your brain does, it gives you what you want. So if you focus on good things, you're going to work towards it. Your brain will help you to get there. If you focus on negative things, this is what you're going to get.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Summarized perfectly. So is there anything else that you wanted to elaborate on with how you help people? I don't know if you've covered everything there, and I just think your work is so important and people don't realize the importance of it. Is there anything else that you could talk about with the work that you're doing and why it's important, and why people really should be doing it?
Thank you, Robin. I think we've touched on a lot of things, but you know, the bottom line is you're so busy with the logistics, and then all of a sudden when you decide, it's like a vacuum.
Yes.
And this is what I find with my clients. They kind of coped until they were here because there were so many things that they had to do. And now all of a sudden the diary is empty. And like I said, I had nowhere to go. I had nowhere to phone, and no one phoned me. And it was just like, and then it's like the whole house just falls in. And that's really when I want that call. But if I can have the call before then, so that I can prepare you just to get out of that dark place deep, you know, quicker, that is just such a benefit, just to hit the ground running and to integrate and find your place in your new society and your community. That would just be awesome.
Yes. And I think it's important for people to, you know, we were talking just now about migrant silos, but I think it is important to reach out to other people in your community before you arrive. So, you know, if you coming from South Africa, join the South African groups in Australia. If you're coming from India, if you're coming from America, all these groups exist and they have their benefits. And I think if you can meet with somebody who's been on the same road as you've been on, and that's also immigrated and understands what you've gone through, reach out to those people and have, you know, make time to see them once you arrive here and have that coffee conversation, because we can all just become individuals, and that's not, you know, the world is becoming a little bit like that already. But use that time before you arrive to reach out to the different communities and start making friends.
And I'm very feel very strong about teaching my clients to find the place where they belong, you know, whether it's sport, whether it's church, and meet your neighbors, invite them over, and put yourself out there. Say yes to invitations.
Absolutely.
I know in the beginning you sometimes, though you don't see anyone, you don't know anyone, you don't feel like seeing anyone, and it's hard to put yourself out there, but that's how you do it. You've got to build your network. You have to build a history with people and places and things.
Yes.
And that is how you find your feet. So you've got to say yes. It's hard, but you've got. The other thing that I feel strong about is volunteering.
Yes, very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Volunteer at your kids' school. You know, do charities, work at Solvos. Solvos is the high quality secondhand things that get sold for charity here in Australia. But also something that's important to me is for families to Skype their family or Zoom their families often.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lady by the name of Helen Ellis, and she's writing a series of books on distance grandparenting, distance grandchildren. And, you know, I thought I had that down pat, and I read her book and you sort of realize you don't have it down pat. And those are things you need to be doing before you leave. You know, put things like Team Viewer onto grandma's iPad or whatever it might be, so that she's having a problem, make sure that Skype's on there, that she knows how to use it or he knows. Those things need to be done before you leave, and those relationships, to keep forging those relationships and having those, you know, coming back to the family values, but also, you know, if there's grandchildren involved, it's very important for both the grandchildren and the grandparents to stay connected. So that's definitely something that should be done in advance of arriving.
Yeah, that's a very, very useful tip, because grandma doesn't necessarily know how it works.
No, and we're all quick to assume that it's, that's easy. Grandma, it's not so easy.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we're actually going to do a Zoom with our family who's in America this evening, and we're actually looking forward to that. Yeah, it's important. It's important. And it also comes back to who you are
Yes.
your identity and keeping your values.
Absolutely. It's been an absolute delight talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us on a Sunday evening. I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you very, very much. Where can people get in contact with you? And yes, I think we've spoken enough about the importance of it. Where can they find you?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Robin. It's an absolute privilege. And like I say, it's really, it comes from the heart. I really have a passion helping these guys because I know what it feels like.
Yes.
They can contact me via Facebook. It's Dr. Gerda Unbecoming, or email me at Gerda at Dr. Gerda or Gerda, Dr. Gerda. .com.au, Gerda at drgerda.com.au.
Perfect. We'll put that in the comments so that everybody's got the correct spelling of it. And you work with all different nationalities.
Of course.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes.
All right, wonderful.
We all face the same challenges. It's true. It's that golden thread.
We certainly do. And being prepared for it is the important part. But thank you so much. I wish you a lovely week ahead. And I'll be, I'm sure we'll be talking again in the next few weeks. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Robin. I love this opportunity and I really hope that it will make a difference. Have a good week.
Thanks, Kata. Bye-bye.